A few years ago, when I was teaching a class of Year 9 pupils about air compressors and how they store energy with compressed air, I took out my pocket watch just to check what the time was. But then it occurred to me that I might ask them what makes the pocket watch work. So I said to the class, look, here's my pocket watch. Can you tell me what do you think makes this watch work? And so, of course, I had a variety of answers. Some, one or two said batteries. I said, no, straight away, this is not an electrically operated clock. Then I had some weird and wonderful answers, a pendulum, solar panels. They really had no idea. So I said to them, well, you know, the honest truth is, I'll tell you, it's simply a spring. There is a spring inside this watch. And then I proceeded to explain to them what a spring was. Now, I had the same experience with a second class of students who also, Year 9 students, no one had a clue what a spring was. So I thought that today, perhaps I will talk a little bit about springs. So here is my beautiful pocket watch, and I will now show you how there is inside, how it's actually powered by the spring. And we can actually see the spring simply by taking it like this and by taking the back off there. And there you see a magnificent coiled spring which actually makes this watch. And we can, when we wind up the watch, you see, and we can actually read what it says on the label. It says Percy Edwards and Company, 71 Piccadilly. Sorry, I turned it round to myself. Percy Edwards and Company, and it says Swiss made, which is the sign of a very, very good manufacturer. Now, I'm now going to wind it up a little bit and just watch that turnaround. And you can see this huge spring inside. And would you know that this spring will keep this watch working for a whole week? So you only need to wind it up once a week. So there you see, that was my first introduction to springs. For many children, they had never seen or heard of such a spring. And I just wanted to show you, I have more of these pocket watches. I have one here. I have a couple more to show you here, like this, you see. And I wanted, and the other thing, you know, I then asked them to listen, because you can hear the ticking sound of the watch. So while I hold these two here, I will place another one, which I have here. I will place this one close to my microphone, and perhaps you can hear it ticking. I can certainly hear it, but I hope the microphone picked that up. Now, let me show you the inside of this one, because this beautiful pocket watch, which is it's a Western Railways. Let me just have a quick. I'll just have a quick read. It's called the West End Watch Company Railway Service. Another beautiful device, again Swiss made. And just let's have a look inside this one, because we're going to see something slightly different, a different kind of spring in this one. And you'll notice there's a beautiful polished surface in there which protects it. That's it, exactly. I got Oscar on there. I was hoping I would catch him. And now we take this, and please just look at this. And look at this wonderful mechanism. It looks as though it's brand new, and yet it's 100 years old. Well, you see, with those two covers protecting it, it's not surprising. But you see, what we've got in there is we have got a hairspring, and that is an oscillating, it's called a balance wheel, which oscillates backwards and forwards all the time, and that activates the mechanism which causes the hands to go around. But we're not going to go into many more detail. We can now gently close this back, and I will now continue to tell you something about these wonderful mechanical devices. Now, the person whose name is definitely associated with watches, chronometers, is John Harrison. It was John Harrison who, in the middle of the 18th century, undertook one of the most difficult engineering and scientific challenges ever put forward before mankind. And the challenge was to build a chronometer, or a watch, today we call them watches or chronometer, which would keep time accurately to an accuracy of about 2 to 3 seconds per week, if not even longer. This was necessary because it helped in navigation at sea to determine longitude. But today, let's just focus. John Harrison was brought to the attention of the public about 20 years ago when a film was made about him, a book was written about him, and he's undoubtedly one of the greatest characters that has walked this planet as far as science and technology are concerned. And I have here a book I just wanted to show you so we can admire the man here. This is a book, The Illustrated Longitude by Dava Sobel. It was a very, very popularly well-received book. And here you see is the man himself, John Harrison, there proudly holding the result of 40 years of work, no less, and holding his marine chronometer. Now, he did do well out of it financially. There was a very good financial reward for this. And he wrote his name into the annals of history as one of the great, as I said, scientists and technologists through the construction of this marine chronometer. But before we go on a little bit further and say about a little bit about the applications of springs, etc., just a couple of other things I'd like to show you. You see, this here is how a watch spring, this is a mainspring, how this is actually, how the watchmaker receives it. You see, it's a long sheet of steel like this, and this is what we call spring steel. It's very springy indeed, and you will also notice that at the end of it, as I'm holding it up there, there are some coloured lines which are sort of purple, bluish, or straw coloured, etc. Now, those purple lines are very, very important because they represent a region of what we call tempering. This spring has been tempered by heating it to a certain temperature just at the end. And the purpose of this is to make this end less springy, because you see, springs, and this is made of steel, spring steel, are potentially very brittle. And if you bend them at an extreme angle like this, where they're attached to the mechanism, there is a possibility that they will break. They will simply snap due to the extreme angle of it. So they're tempered at either end. This end too has got this tempering, and then they are wound into the barrel of the spring. And I have such a barrel to show you. It's very, very tidy indeed, and I'm going to hold it here. And this is, you see, a barrel from a watch of a very small size, and inside there will be a tightly coiled spring, and you can notice the cogs on the wheel, etc. And that's just to show you. So that is what a mainspring, the main driving power supply for the watch. And here I have another spring, and this is just to show you. This is the one you see, which is the oscillating one, and this is a hairspring. It's quite remarkably small, and if I twiddle the thing, you could see it going backwards and forwards rapidly there, because of course it's got nothing attached to it, and it's the same one that we saw in the watch. Now, what I personally find absolutely unbelievable is that John Harrison actually had the technology. He wasn't the only person. Other people already had developed the technology for making these springs and for putting them into these chronometers. So extraordinary that already 1750, that's 270 years ago, whatever, that is an extraordinary achievement, as far, in my opinion. And this, by the way, this is just another one, another spring from a device. Now, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put my springs aside, you see, my clocks aside, and I'm now going to tell you that the reason, you see, why I was surprised that children today didn't know anything about springs is because as a child, I had been exposed to springs a huge amount. And the main reason is because springs were popularly used in toys. And those of us who were fortunate to have a toy train set or a Meccano set or some other device, little motor cars, or they had all sorts of, where you wound up the spring and then it did things. That's why we all knew about springs. But of course today it's much rarer. So one cannot be that surprised that young people today are not familiar, but springs have played an enormous role in the history of the human race. You see, I'm showing you certain types of springs, but I suppose the spring that was popularly used ever since the dawn of humanity was the bow and arrow, for instance, because the bow, when you actually bend it, it acts as a spring. You pull the string, and then you've stored energy. When you pull it, you store energy. You release the arrow, and suddenly that energy, which is potential energy, becomes kinetic energy as the arrow flies through the air. So I just wanted to show you a couple of more examples of how springs are used, literally just two more, and one of them will be in toys. Now, as I said, when I was young, people used to have Meccano sets, and here you see I have a model of a sort of a lorry. This is 1950s probably style, and it has indeed got a little spring motor, a clockwork motor. We were called clockwork motors, you see. But before we see this in operation, let me just show you what one of these clockwork motors look like. Now, I have to tell you, I am very lucky because I was able to purchase one of these absolutely brand new. You see, I just took it out of its label, and you could still get these, by the way. They're about 20, 25 pounds each in this sort of condition. This is mint, never been used. Today, we are launching this for the first time in history. Please note, look at the beautiful silver, the gold, the brass gears, all shining. You're not going to see many motors of this vintage with shining gears like that. And there are two levers. There is the lever here, let me show you. This is the lever for switching it on and off. This is the on-off lever, and this is in the off position now and then on, so this is off. And here we have the forward and the reverse gear. And there is the output, which is a little pulley wheel like that. So I'm going to wind it up a little bit now. I'm going to just wind it up a little bit. Let me just get it in the off position. There we are. It's switched off. We'll now put our key in. And this is, oh, by the way, do notice the end of the spring has got those colorings on it, those tempering marks. Once again, all the springs in this type of device have to be tempered because of the possibility that they may fracture or crack at the point of anchor. So I'm winding it up now. We wind it up like this. It makes a very satisfying clicking sound. There we are. And now you see, what we do is we release this, and hopefully it'll all start turning. I'll put it this way. Ah, isn't that just such fun? And now you see, we can now change that. And there, this is the reversing gear. As you see, that's the neutral, then one way and then the other way. So this is our brand new, this is probably made in 1960, something like that, for the first time in 60 years. It's just undergone its maiden launch. So now, having shown you how one of these looks, perhaps let us now wind up one of our little motors here, you see. And you see I have a special constructor. This is a very, very elementary, and I specially made this for pupils in order that they could learn a little bit about obviously the springs, but also about the driving, about how motor cars are driven. And this has got what we call a propeller shaft down the middle, and it's got a couple of gears here. This is a pinion, and this is a contrate wheel and another pinion. So what we'll do is we'll wind this up. We'll wind up our motor now, you see, like this. Just give it a couple of turns. This one, by the way, is in much worse condition, but it doesn't matter, it still works. And if I now put our switch it on, you'll notice hopefully there you see the wheels are turning. So now we put it down. Whoops, daisy, let's put it back here, and hopefully there she goes beautifully, and again, there we go, and again. So there it is, you see, such fun. And you used to be able to, 50 or 60 years ago, even more recent, probably 30 or 40, you could make these models. They have weight, and you could take this apart and build another one, and another one, and another one, and so forth. So that's just one example. This is one which I made, as I said, for teaching purposes. But this is one here which was made by one of my pupils. I asked her to make it. Her name was Marjorie, and she made this especially just because she was very interested in engineering. And I said, Marjorie, this is Marjorie, can you make one of these? And she did. She followed the plan. But let's look at the drive mechanism on this. You see here what we've got a pulley wheel there, and once again we have a spring. This is a rubber band, you see, and it's a pulley mechanism. But the rubber band remains in constant tension. So it doesn't actually, the point is, it makes friction between these two wheels, enabling it to go forward. Now, hopefully I have wound this up, you see. So I'm going to now I've got a screwdriver here where I can operate the levers. So hopefully I'll operate the right one and it'll start working. So let's see now. Oh, just wonderful. Just wonderful. And there it is, you see, once again, our Meccano model driven by a spring. That's the important point. But now I wanted to show something completely different. Let's just leave it turning there. It's rather fun. Let it run itself out. We'll turn it upside down. There we are. And I wanted to show you another motor like this, you see. Now, if I try and wind this one up, please watch carefully what happens. I'm winding it up, I've switched it in the off position, and I'm winding it up. Oh dear, it's not getting any tighter. Now that's bad news. I'm winding it, and I then lock it, nothing happens. What this means is we have a broken mainspring. Now, unfortunately, this spring, although it looks beautiful, the motor, the gears, everything, absolutely useless. You can't wind it up because the spring is broken. So let's investigate. Let's investigate the spring, see if it comes out. There are just 4 screws which I have to take apart, undo, and I'm going to undo 4 screws now, and hopefully this will now come apart relatively easily. So if you don't mind, it's not going to take much time, and we take this one off here. These, by the way, they're called grub screws, and we can just take it apart like this. 1, 2 has now come out, and there are, and notice, by the way, wonderful magnetic screwdriver there, and then we take another one out here, and we'll be able to inspect our spring to see what the problem is and whether we can fix it by any chance, because you know, one of my things in life is I do like to fix things which are broken. So let's see what the possibilities on this. Wonderful. Our magnet once again picking up the tiny grub screw there, and a final screw comes apart now. Final screw, sorry, just a little bit of fumbling around there. Just get our screwdriver in here. Oh my goodness gracious me. And now you see, here it is, the whole thing. And as you see, it's all fallen apart. And it was, did you see that? No chance that I'm ever going to put that together again. That wasn't very bright. It wouldn't have been very bright had the motor been working. But of course, this motor is useless. And what we will now find, as I show you inside, you see, this is, by the way, the same concept of a jack-in-the-box. It's popularly used. A jack-in-the-box is hidden with a spring. Open it, and by God, everything comes flying out. And if I was wanting to punish a student severely, I would say, put that together again. But I haven't offered such a punishment to anyone. But as you can imagine, that would not be a simple task, especially with one of these. Now, we can now see what our problem is. You see, because at the end, there should be, at the end of this spring, let me just unravel. It's fine at that end, but you see at the other end, the point where it anchors, to the bit in the, to the spring anchor right at the end is in fact broken. Now, there should be a little eye there. There should be an eye, a hole where it actually latches on, but there is no hole. It's broken. And the reason why it's broken is because, unfortunately, these springs are rather brittle. Thank you very much, Oscar. They're rather brittle, and in spite of the tempering process that was applied, it has still fractured. So this is absolutely useless. So what I wanted to do is just tell you a couple of things about what these springs are actually made of and why this can happen. Well, To start off with, they're made of steel. Steel is an alloy of iron and carbon primarily. And I have to tell you that we have been able to make springs or spring steel for many, many hundreds of years. But the science of it has only really evolved in the last 200 years or so. And the science of metals, or how different one metal behaving under different conditions with different substances being alloyed with it. The substances, by the way, are usually different metals or the element carbon. Other non-metal elements can be used. But let's concentrate on steel. And this constitutes the study of these metals and their behavior is called metallurgy. It's a very, very noble science indeed, unbelievably complex to investigate the mechanical and the physical properties of different metals. And it's thanks to the science of metallurgy that we have today evolved into the remarkable world that we live in today, thanks to the strength of the steels, their unrustability, should I say, their ability to resist corrosion, their very high tensile strength, and so forth. So what I wanted to tell you is just first of all that because this is such a great science, it has been written about, of course. I just wanted to show you one book which I find absolutely amazing, and it's a book here which is called, it's by Sir Robert Hadfield, one of the great metallurgists of all time. He was attached, by the way, to Sheffield University. There is in fact a building named after him, and this has actually got, it says, to Mr. A. Marshall, with the author's best wishes, July 1931. The book was actually published in 1925, and it is a wonderful metallurgy and its influence on modern progress. So I'm not going to tell you anything else apart from that. This is a phenomenal book, and I just wanted to show you one photograph. You see, it's got nothing to do with springs, but it has got a lot to do with how we test metals to see how strong they are. There you see a picture of a man standing next to a wheel of a steam locomotive. It's one of the driving wheels of a steam locomotive. It weighs about 2 tons, and it has been tested to destruction. And one of the things that you must know is that in this day, and when metallurgy is a science, everything that's in the new compositions, new temperature treatments of alloys, all the alloys are subject to very, very rigorous testing. And this wheel, for instance, it was dropped from a height of between 15 and 45 feet, no less than 30 times, weighing 2 tons. And then it had a weight of 3 tons dropped on it another few times just to make sure that it wouldn't be able to be formed, you know. But the point of this is not to try and destroy it at all. It's simply to see what is the capacity for withstanding a whole amount of treatment. And all this type of treatment to destruction, testing to destruction, is used in all scientific laboratories throughout the world to this day. Not only with metals, but with all sorts of other materials, whether it's plastics and polymers, ceramics, glasses, etc., etc., etc. So the testing of materials is of crucial importance to the way in which we understand the world works. And now I just wanted to tell you that as far as steels are concerned, there are, or spring steel is concerned, there are a couple of points to tell you. There are the steel from which the spring is made has been alloyed with carbon. Now, spring steel is what we call a high carbon steel. You can have high carbon, medium carbon, and low carbon. Low carbon steels are 0.1 to 0.3, then 0.3 to 0.7. That's a medium carbon steel, and then 0.8 to as higher than that. Those are called high carbon steels. And depending on the proportion of carbon by weight that the iron has been alloyed with, you get different kinds of steel. And spring steel is traditionally a high carbon steel. What that means is it's very hard and it's springy, but at the same time it's quite brittle. So what we do is we temper the steel to reduce its hardness and reduce its brittleness, but at the same time trying to keep it springy. It's a very complicated process, and all I can tell you is that you can do university degrees in metallurgy. So I'm not going to I can't possibly hope to explain, but I did want to show you a couple of interesting experiments. Here I have another spring from another one of my broken Meccano clockwork motors, and I'm going to show you just two different effects that we can exert on this to affect its behavior. Now at the moment you will not dispute that this is very springy, and I can just show you this by, if I bend it like this a couple of times, you see it springs back to its shape. It certainly doesn't change its shape either. But what we're going to do now is to apply heat treatment to it, and Oscar I'm going to ask to join me, and what we're going to do, we're going to apply heat treatment to it. Excuse me while I put my motor car over there, put the other one over here as well, and just have a little tidying session. So, Oscar, what I'm going to ask you to do, we don't need the gauntlets for this, but I am now going to subject this to two different types of heat treatment. And we'll use this one already because I've tested this a couple of times. And what we're going to do is take away our terrible mess. I'm so sorry about that, you see. By the way, there's another spring in here. This spring is it's a spring which is used as a spacer. It's used in compression to maintain spacing of the various components. And what we're going to do now, we're going to put this away here and this away now, and we're going to now do a test involving high temperatures. So what we're going to do is take this spring which we've got, and I am going to ask Oscar, excuse me, I will wear gauntlets for this because I've shown you already that it's springy, and we're going to do two tests. One of them is to heat it to a very high temperature, which reduces the springiness and it makes it softer, but at the same time, it makes it extremely brittle. So we'll reduce the springiness of it will be reduced, and you'll see, hopefully it will snap. That will be red heat. And then we'll do another test where we will heat it to a much lower temperature and allow it to cool down a little bit slowly in a process called annealing, and then you will see it will completely lose its springiness and will be able to bend it. And the reason why this happens is because these heating processes alter the structure of the steel. Please, Oscar, let's go, and we're going to try and get it to red heat then. So turn on our torch. We have a little butane torch there, and Oscar's now going to get this to red heat. A bright red heat, you see, it's beginning to bend a little bit, but that doesn't matter. That's the important thing. It's going to go hotter still, Oscar, hotter still. Let me just carry on. Hotter still there. Okay, and now we're going to plunge it into cold water. So watch carefully into cold water, et voila. So we've now plunged it into cold water, you see. And now what we've done, we've destroyed the string's temper. So if I now take it like this, instantly, you see, it snapped. So it had become very brittle. It had lost its springiness. So that's the first point I've demonstrated. And in the second experiment, which we'll do, is we will now just heat it not to such a high temperature, and we will allow it to cool down in air. So over a larger area, please, Oscar, not quite as strong with the heat, but we don't want it glowing red hot, but over slightly large, not too large, because I'm going to just bend a bit more. Yeah, that's fine. And now you see, we now let it cool down. And now what's happened now is, hopefully, because it's lost its temper, it will have lost its springiness, and now we'll be able to deform it, and it will no longer be so springy. We'll be able to make a permanent bend in it. So now if I take this in my gloves, you see, and bend it like that, you'll notice it's not breaking because we didn't, but we've made a bend. And Oscar, can we just do one more bend, please, just to finish off this little demonstration here? So what I'm illustrating for you essentially is how the way in which a steel is heated, how this can dramatically affect its mechanical properties, because we're affecting, okay, thank you, Oscar. There we are. It's deformed a little bit, obviously, but I'll let it cool down in air. I'll blow it. It's still pretty warm. And you can already see, actually, that this is certainly not going to be a spring anymore, but we will bend it just a little more to deform it further. So there we are. It's now, you see, it's bent. There is no way that that's going to become a spring anymore in those 2 points, because we have destroyed the spring in this by this process of heating followed by annealing, which is slow cooling. Once again, two very, very important processes. I've showed you two uses of springs so far. One is as a power supply, or let's say a store of potential energy for a mechanical device. Another one is for use as an oscillator, and that enabling the wheel to go backwards and forwards, the balance wheel. But I'm now going to come to the third application of springs, and that is in motor cars. I'm going to show you now two springs that are used in motor cars, and one of them I have here. This here, you see, is this comes from a Triumph Herald motor car. And would you believe it, that this spring, it's called a semi-elliptic leaf spring, this supports the entire weight of a motor car weighing 3/4 of a ton at the back. It's the rear spring. Now, the Triumph Herald itself, let me just explain to you a little bit about this car. It was a car which was developed in the late 1950s, an exceptionally well-engineered car, outstandingly well-engineered, and I'll just show you here what the Triumph Herald looks like. I have here the Triumph owner's manual, and you can see there are just three different versions of this car which are drawn here. This is a Triumph Herald 1360, and let me just read to you from the introduction. Designed and built to give long and consistently trouble-free service, your Herald 1360 also embodies many safety features, the very presence of which will add to your confidence. Now, I have to tell you, trouble-free service, long and continuously trouble-free. I have been a very fortunate owner of a Triumph Herald for 45 years. I have, of course, followed all the instructions for maintaining it, and I'm not a professional mechanic, and it's been remarkably simple to maintain. I have never had any significant accidents. I have never had any significant breakdowns. The cars keep going, brilliantly engineered. That's my own personal experience. So just a little bit about this type of spring. I'll put my gauntlets on because they're a little. These types of spring, this is made up of leaves. I'm going to bring it up close so that you can see the leaves perhaps a little bit closer there. And there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There are 7 spring steel leaves. You see they're screwed together with nuts, with nuts and bolts, and they're held together with these various devices in between, and they bolt onto the wheels at the end, and this is supported in the middle of the car at the back on the differential unit. I'm not going to go into the car mechanics, but all I can tell you is this type of device has been around since the middle of the 18th century. These types of springs were used on coaches and in horse-drawn coaches, and typically they would have been in that position. Not only would horse-drawn coaches have used these, but also today on railway carriages. You'll see much shorter versions of these on railway carriages, should you get the opportunity ever to see one. Best in a museum, of course, and then you could see these in action. So this is a leaf spring. It's called a semi-elliptical one because of its shape, and I find it quite extraordinary that something I can lift as easily as this can yet support the weight of half a motor car. So what does a spring actually do in a motor car? What's its function? It certainly doesn't store energy. Well, it serves to smooth out the bumps. It serves to smooth out the bumps as you go over different areas of the the road surface is uneven or whatever. And furthermore, it smooths out, the way we would describe it, we say it smooths out the mechanical pulses generated by the car going up and down. And this is my final spring I wanted to show you. And this is, of course, this is a coil spring or a helical spring. And this is from the front suspension of a Triumph Herald motor car. And I have specially painted it in a variety of colours. And just to show you now, the reason why this is the Triumph Herald design was so good, because it had independent suspension on both the rear wheels and the front wheels. It had also disc brakes, which were very novel at the time. As I said, we're looking at the late 50s, early 60s, and these actually disc brakes came in the mid 60s. And this type of suspension, by the way, is called a double wishbone suspension. There are the two pieces in blue you see. They're also sometimes called A-frames. They look like a letter A, and they are the double wishbone, and they are made to move up and down in parallel as the vehicle goes up and down over bumps. And of course, the energy of the bumps is absorbed by the coil spring, which is in here. Now, the red bit in the middle, that's what we call a shock absorber, and that serves to dampen it. So you don't go do-yo-yo-yo-yo-yo like that. You go do-dum, do-dum, like that. That's called a damper or a shock absorber. And here we have the top, this is painted in gold here, that's called a top ball joint there. This in yellow here is where we attach a brake pipe to it. Then we have this, the whole unit here. This of course is the front wheel. This is attached to what we call a vertical link with a lower trunnion down at the bottom. And there is a steering knuckle here where you can steer the car connected to the steering mechanism. So that in essence is it. I have shown you today some examples of different types of spring and some examples of their applications. And to summarize, a spring is an elastic device. It is used, it has three purposes. One of them, it can be used for storing energy to drive a mechanical device. It can be used as a mechanical oscillator in certain devices, as shown in our pocket watches, and it can be used to smooth out mechanical pulses, as shown in our motor car suspension. I hope that this talk will have sprung you into a greater interest in springs.